sort of overarching theme around what I found in the diabetic hearts. What we have found is that with the metabolic dysfunction that we saw in diabetic hearts, and trying to figure out why do diabetics have a higher rate of mortality from heart attacks or higher risk of heart attack, and even if they survive heart attack, I believe they have fourfold higher risk of developing heart failure afterwards. So it has something to do with metabolism. We know that there is a dysfunction there. What we have seen is that metabolic inflexibility is very prominent in diabetic hearts. So what is metabolic flexibility? It is the ability of your heart, or any organs really, when we talk about metabolic flexibility, is the ability of your body to switch substrates, because we have so many different substrates to choose from. We've got glucose, we've got proteins, we've got fats, we've got ketones.
If you've been thinking about starting a ketogenic diet, I encourage you to just do it. Yes, you are the reason I started this podcast in the first place. More than anything else, I love to empower people to take responsibility for their own health. And for so many people, a ketogenic diet is the most effective way to reverse metabolic dysfunction, which is the very foundation of all chronic illness. But to do this effectively, you need 3 specific tools, or you're going to struggle and you won't see results. I do not want this to happen to you. I give you these 3 tools and walk you through how to set them up and use them to transform your health in my 5-day keto challenge. You can register right now for my next 5-day keto challenge at ketogenicdietcoach.com. Hello and welcome to the Ketogenic Diet Show. My name's Mary Beauchamp, and I will be your hostess today. I am excited to be interviewing Dr. Latt Mansor. He is the lead researcher at HVMN, a company which produces exogenous ketones. In his research, he explored the complex relationship between diet and oxygen, and how cells adapt and sense oxygen availability, particularly as it relates to the function of the diabetic heart, and how it adapts to hypoxia, or lack of oxygen. We discuss how ketones can improve many different types of diseases that are impacted by a lack of oxygen, and we look at the potential of ketones to improve metabolic function and oxygenation. I will put a link below in the show notes to Dr. Mansor's study. I'm really excited for you to share your journey because you have such a rich history leading up to this point. You've done so many things, and I'd love for you to just tell us how you got into this and what took you here and what was your pathway to get where you are today.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words, Mary. I am very happy to be here as well. And as we all do all the time, is to spread knowledge and spread information so that people know the science and the data behind ketogenic diet, exogenous ketones, and apply it to optimize their own lives. So happy to be here and share whatever I know, and we can have a back and forth discussion around what you find in your practices versus what I know in the science, in the clinical trials, and all that.
Great. So I know you have done a lot of things, and your education is incredibly impressive. So tell us just sort of what led you to be where you are now and working with this group that you're working with now.
Sure. I'm going to go back to where I come from, which is Malaysia. So I was born and bred in Malaysia. I studied all the way, high school and everything throughout, and haven't left the country until right before my undergrad. So I went to the UK for my undergrad, did my bachelor's in biotechnology from the University of Nottingham. And then immediately after that, I went to the US, and that was my first time in the US. And I did my master's in Columbia, also in biotechnology. And then after that, I thought, I sort of thought to myself, I said, I don't think I'm cut for research. So I'm not going to research. I'm going to look for a job in the industry and really start earning money instead of putting myself in more debts, right? So I said, let's look at pharmaceutical companies because, industry, pharmaceutical, I focused a lot on drug development as well during the course in my master's. And I found a job in Parsippany in New Jersey with the medicines company. It's a pharmaceutical company. And worked for them for a year and a half a year in New Jersey, and then 1 year in Munich in Germany. So they flew me there I sort of reported to my boss who's based there, and really had a great time. But during that 1.5 year period, I was so inspired by the people within the company who are so scientific, but also entrepreneurial, that I decided to apply for a PhD in Oxford. And that was what happened. From Germany, I got offered a PhD candidacy in University of Oxford, and specifically in physiology, anatomy, and genetics. My research was in type 2 diabetic hearts. So looking at metabolism of type 2 diabetic heart in hypoxia, which is low oxygen environment. Spent the following 3 to 4 years in my research and got my PhD. And then I came out, went back to Southeast Asia, worked for a diabetes management program company called Hallmusk for 1.5 years before coming out and started my own health tech company as a co-founder myself. Ran that for 1.5 years, and then that was in 2019. I got introduced to HVMN, Health Vitamin and Nutrition, who I'm working for now. And they were looking for a scientist, a research lead, to lead their $6 million contract that they just got from the DoD, the Department of Defense, looking at exogenous ketones and its effect in cognition and physical performance in hypoxia, which is low oxygen. Again, that's where my sort of expertise and understanding around hypoxic metabolism comes in. And they flew me into San Francisco first time. I was in San Francisco in June 2019. And they offered me the job at the end of the week. And I flew here, I think I flew back and then came back here with all the visa and everything sorted out in August 2019. And then pandemic hits. But I've been leading the military contract since then. And I've also done many things. On top of that, I am now the research lead of HVMN. I am in charge of every collaboration, scientific research that we are doing with either universities or research institutions or even independent researchers. I'm usually the point person when it comes to all the questions that's regarding the ketone IQ, which is the exogenous ketone that we sell. And we can talk a bit more about that in terms of what are the differences and everything in the market. But I'm the go-to person when it comes to like different questions around use cases, doses, protocols, optimizations, and what are the data that are available out there that is specifically on performance, specifically on therapeutic uses such as Alzheimer's, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, so on and so forth. So I'll stop there because if I go any further, I'll just sound like I'm like in my 50s. So
okay, that's great. Well, so I'm curious, what were you noticing in the realm of diabetes and heart hypoxia and other hypoxic situations that are occurring, as we know, from insulin resistance and lack of access to ketones, essentially, in the human body? So I'm just so fascinated and curious what you were observing and what maybe some of the studies that you worked on.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question as well. And a lot of people, they can't really put one and one together when they say, oh, so you're looking at cardiovascular disease, but then you're looking at hypoxia, which is low oxygen environment. Like, what's the connection? Many people don't know when you have ischemia, which is the occlusion of blood vessels, and there's a blood clot or there's a lack of blood flow into your heart, and then you're going to have a myocardial infarction or heart attack. Not only you are having the lack of substrates being transported into your heart, you are also going through the lack of oxygen being transported within the blood into your heart. So that is why your heart at that moment is going through hypoxia as well. So that is why I looked at hypoxia as a subset of ischemia. Because oxygen is such an important component in respiration and energy generation that any change in oxygen concentration induces a very abrupt, very acute sort of response within a cell, either from DNA level or mitochondrial level or even the cellular level. It is a very fast adaptation process because the cells and the organs know that you have to adapt really quickly to any change of these oxygen levels so that you can prioritize survivability, let alone optimization. Okay, so that's the connection there. So if overarching theme around what I found in the diabetic hearts. What we have found is that with the metabolic dysfunction that we saw in diabetic hearts, and trying to figure out why do diabetics have a higher rate of mortality from heart attacks or higher risk of heart attack, and even if they survive heart attack, I believe they have fourfold higher risk of developing heart failure afterwards. So it has something to do with metabolism. We know that there is a dysfunction there. What we have seen is that metabolic inflexibility is very prominent in diabetic hearts. So what is metabolic flexibility? It is the ability of your heart, or any organs really, when we talk about metabolic flexibility, is the ability of your body to switch substrates, because we have so many different substrates to choose from. We've got glucose, we've got proteins, we've got fats, we've got ketones. And in what sort of environment that these specific substrates are the most optimal and the most efficient fuel. So that is metabolic flexibility, right? You get stimulus from external factors or inside the cell, and then the cell react to it, and then it chooses the best pathway, the most efficient pathway, the pathway of least resistance, in order to prioritize, first of all, survival, but second of all, when you know how to hack it, you can prioritize optimization as well. So that's what I found in terms of flexibility. And in hypoxia, we know that from a metabolic point of view, we will always prefer glycolysis. Because glucose metabolism, the first pathway, when glucose enters the cell into the cytoplasm, it gets into the glycolytic pathway. Reason being, glycolysis does not require oxygen. So if you are already on low oxygen, you want to go through glycolysis, because then you can provide energy without having to consume oxygen. Now, granted, glycolysis doesn't produce that much ATP, but it's a short-term solution to meet the ATP or the energy demand that your heart has. So whenever a hypoxic environment occur, we will see those cells would switch on all the enzymes, all the hormones that are related to glycolytic pathway. What we have seen in diabetic is the inability for it to switch over from fat oxidation to glycolysis. And to make things clear as well, there is this seesaw effect. When you upregulate glucose metabolism, you downregulate fatty acid metabolism. And then when you upregulate fatty acid metabolism, you downregulate glucose metabolism. It's called the Randall cycle. It was published in 1963 by Randall. Now, that's not to say that if you crank up glucose metabolism, you shut down beta oxidation or fat metabolism. That is not the case. It is always a flux, and it always switches back and forth depending on the environment that the cells are in. So I'll stop there, and I know there's a lot to unpack. I'll let you ask some questions.
Okay, so I think what you're saying is that the preferred fuel source of choice primarily and first and foremost would be glucose. That's
in hypoxia.
Okay. And so when you say hypoxia, you're suggesting a low oxygen environment. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And when establishes a low oxygen environment, what causes that?
So low oxygen, you can think of many occasions that cause low oxygen. So ischemia, for example, blood clot and heart attack, that's one environment that is detrimental, that is hypoxic. But then there are other environments that is more mild. For example, high altitude, when you are going hiking, even when you are doing sprints. So that short amount of time, we can only breathe that much, right? We can only take that many breaths in order to provide our body with the oxygen. So we will temporarily get into that hypoxic environment. And that's very true, what we see in muscles when we produce more lactate, because glycolysis produces lactate. So we can see that. Deep sea exploration, outer space exploration, where oxygen is scarce. All those environments are hypoxic environment. The severity, the acute or chronic exposure, it all depends. Where the heart goes, though, the heart primarily, the preferred fuel of choice is actually fat, between 70 to 90%. At a normal, healthy heart, in normoxia, in normal sort of oxygen concentration, atmospheric pressure, the heart will prefer to use fat. That is why it needs the flexibility, the metabolic flexibility, to switch over to glucose when it needs to, right? You get stimulus from external factors or inside the cell, and then the cell react to it, and then it chooses the best pathway, the most efficient pathway, the pathway of least resistance, in order to prioritize, first of all, survival, but second of all, when you know how to hack it, you can prioritize optimization as well.
Uh-huh. I know that Dr. Stephen Phinney and also Dr. Eric Westman are currently doing tests on heart failure right now with in regards to the use of ketones, and they've both, I just heard them both speak at a conference in San Diego recently, and they spoke about this, and it was really fascinating for them to discover that without a doubt the heart prefers ketones as a fuel source. And so this is very up and coming news, and it's very exciting. And would you also say that that's the case for the brain and other organs?
Yeah, so this is very interesting. If you look at the literature, if you dive in the literature, I think Dr. Salvaru Urista, he did a very neat experiment looking at heart failure in animals, and he measured the enzymes and transporters that are related to ketone transport and ketone metabolism. When given exogenous ketones, these hearts actually take up ketones and upregulate these enzymes whenever they're available. And this is an acute effect. They don't even need sort of adaptation period. Now, as to how efficient one uses ketone, that really depends on the person, obviously. But know that in our bodies, we already have these codes in our DNA to really bring in ketones into the cell, as well as metabolize it for energy. As far as brain goes, it goes without saying that ketone is brain fuel. I mean, we know that, in a lot of circumstances, when there is cognitive impairment, there is energy deficiency in the brain. We look at Alzheimer's, we look at, dementia. We are looking at almost like a glucose hypometabolism, as a deficiency in metabolizing glucose to provide your brain with energy. And then these people, when they go on a ketogenic diet or when they're given exogenous ketones, they saw an increase in energy generation in the brain. And that also coupled with a corresponding increase in cognitive performance. And we have also seen in a paper by Mujika Parady that when these aging adults are given ketogenic diet for a week, as well as given ketones, exogenous ketones, just one dose acutely, both arms actually saw an increase in brain network stability, meaning they are measuring using functional MRI the communication between brain regions, and that's what they call brain network, and the stability decreases as we age. But because these patients were put on ketogenic diet or exogenous ketones, they actually saw an increase in brain network stability. So that's huge, knowing that, first of all, our brain would prefer to take in ketones, and as long as ketones are available, the intake would go up linearly, and that does not affect other substrates uptake. So it's not that our heart or our brain would substitute ketones or substitute other substrates with ketones, i.e., people are like, oh, if I'm taking more ketones, does that mean I'm sparing more glucose? There have been studies looking at glycogen sparing when it comes to performance, but overall, the studies in the heart and the brain, they saw the uptake of ketones increases as ketone is becoming more available, but that does not decrease the uptake of fat and glucose, which means, what does that mean? That means that you are getting a whole tank of fuel for energy. So you are providing your most important organs, your brain, your heart, that has to work 24/7, even when you're asleep, with the extra energy it needs to maintain function, but also to perform optimally, especially for your brain.
So it's so fascinating to me that the human body is designed in this way. We have the genetic blueprint to do this. We have evolved to have the perfect mechanism and machinery in place to switch back and forth. And yet most people are running most of the time on only glucose. And so they are not getting the benefit of this sort of hybrid engine that we have built into our system. And what obviously we know that diabetes and heart disease and Alzheimer's, anything that's rooted in insulin resistance is that's why we're getting this. That's why this problem is occurring, is because the body becomes insulin resistant over time. It becomes non-responsive to the glucose, and it's looking for that alternative fuel source, but it's not getting it. And so then the systems just sort of start to shut down and eventually die, in a sense. So maybe you could just explain that a little bit. Is that how you might describe what's happening with even ischemic situations with diabetes in the fingers and toes and other things? That's a lack of oxygen essentially too. So we're getting this also just with inflammatory conditions as well. Is that correct?
So I would start with, going to back to basics, right? What are substrates used for? They are all used for energy, right? But then in this day and age, when we have such high access to foods and high calorie foods, we are ending up with an excess amount of calories. So when you have like all these excess amount of calories, your bodies can only take in so much. And I'm simplifying here a little bit, right? You get stimulus from external factors or inside the cell, and then the cell react to it, and then it chooses the best pathway, the most efficient pathway, the pathway of least resistance, in order to prioritize, first of all, survival, but second of all, when you know how to hack it, you can prioritize optimization as well.
Quick break from the programming to let you know that nothing makes me happier than empowering people to make informed decisions about their health based on the hard scientific facts. The ketogenic diet has stood the test of time, and the scientific literature shows us that this can be a powerful healing strategy. Don't let another day slip by when you could be doing something proactively to change your health. If you're still wondering how to begin your keto diet, it's time to stop thinking about it and start doing something. Go to ketogenicdietcoach.com and register for my next 5-day keto challenge. You will walk away with a clear plan, and I know you will absolutely be amazed by the results you will see in just 5 days.
And your cells are essentially telling itself to say, you need to stop taking in. So you're blocking in all this insulin, and then you sort of create insulin resistance. And then as a result, all this blood glucose is increasing because the cells are not taking it in, because it can't take in anymore, because you're already having so much substrates that you're not burning. The cells are trying to cope and not die because of the oxidative damage. And then you have this high blood sugar and exposing these nerve endings and kidneys with this high sugar. That's where the damage comes in. So nephropathy and all this inflammation, and blood vessels inflammation as well. So that's where it all comes in. So I think, and we talk about this on our HVMN podcast quite a bit as well, as to what really drives insulin resistance, what really drives inflammation, because there is one school of thought that really, especially us in the keto space, we think that it's the high sugar, high processed food and high refined sugar that is causing it. And that could be part of the reason. And then I've also interviewed researchers who wholeheartedly believe that it could be the fats that actually drive inflammation by producing the ceramidase as well as diacylglycerol that directly impact insulin receptor, that blocks insulin from coming into the cell. And then I sort of sat down understanding the metabolism as a basic sort of pathway, and then look into it. And I really think that it's the excess of calories here.
Excess.
It doesn't matter if excess of excess of calorie here, because it's not just fats or glucose, because most of the time what we consume is high in fat and glucose.
Yeah.
So and then you get the two school of thought where you get high fat, low carb diet, and then high carb, low fat diet. They both show improved results because they both lower the total calories compared to a high fat, high carb diet. And then when you have that sort of surplus of calories, you ended up piling on a lot of storage. And when you pile on a lot of storage, your cells are going to increase metabolism. So even though we think, oh, it's counter intuitive, someone who has excess of calories and surplus of calories, they are, overweight, they are obese. Surely their metabolism is slow. But if you think about it, having so much substrates, your cell will also be working very hard to increase metabolism. That's why people are heavier. They're always feeling warmer. You can see those hallmarks where you're increasing metabolism, trying to keep up and burn those storage. But the problem is you keep piling it on, so they can't keep up, and they keep on storing and bigger. When you increase metabolism, the cells that have the cells that have highest metabolic rates, or the mitochondria works the hardest, actually has the highest rate of ROS production. ROS is reactive oxygen species. That's a family of free radicals. It causes oxidative damage. It damages the mitochondria. It damages the cell. It's detrimental, right? So if you have that high amount of metabolism, but then you're actually not using it and you're increasing the oxidative damage, you are also inducing mitochondrial damage. When you're inducing mitochondrial damage, it's a powerhouse of the cells. So everything else is going to get affected. It's going to negatively impact your brain function. It's going to negatively impact your performance. It's going to negatively impact your mood, your energy levels. So I think that whole picture is yet to be fully painted out by research and data. It's all bits and parts of different studies that we've learned in terms of mechanism of action. But at the end of the day, know that the human body is more sophisticated than we think. And it requires way more research and way longer time to really put all these together in this complicated web of metabolism.
Right. So what you're saying is that the excess in calories is the problem. And so what if people aren't having an excess calories? They're eating just enough, the same amount. Let's say they're eating equal calories to what they're burning. Then does it matter? And that's one question I have. If does it matter then the ratios of the macros at that point? Will that also improve oxygenation or decrease hypoxia in a sense, just to reduce calories in general? Would that have an effect? And then what would the ratio be? And does it matter what kind of fats? So in the world that I live in or work in, it is important what kind of fats we're eating, because we have increased our level of intake of, unhealthy fats and processed fats. And, those are highly oxidative as well. Some of the seed oils and things like that. So does that have an impact on the ability for the substrate to enter the cell, or is any kind of fat you're saying may have an impact?
Okay, that's a great question. So first of all, decreasing the calories intake will definitely help, right? But calories in, calories out argument, I think we both agree it's quite outdated by now. Knowing that we are looking at metabolites as signaling molecule nowadays. That metabolites and substrates, they do more than just providing us with energy. They have direct effect on pathways and cascading effects on the downstream targets to really affect cell function and affect metabolism in general. So even though you are lowering, first of all, make sure that you have less calories consumption than an obese person, and most of the time this sort of excess calories is driven by unhealthy sources to begin with, because usually these unhealthy sources are very calorie dense and they're hyper palatable. So that's cutting those off. Some of the times, some doctors actually told me that they treat their patients, literally just ask them to avoid these hyper processed food. That in and of itself reduce their calories significantly and actually induce weight loss. They didn't even have to change any ratio. They didn't have to change any macros. Just cutting those out, improve mood and improve body weight. Yeah. So, but then after, you have fixed the calories, then you have to look at the quality of food for sure, because certain qualities of food will affect your microbiome differently. It will affect your metabolism differently. fats may be metabolized differently than glucose. So what are you using it for? For an endurance athlete, maybe they want to have more storage versus a sprinter who wants more sugar for the glycolytic pathway. Granted, nowadays people are experimenting and biohacking it, and you have keto diet athletes who are also sprinting, who are also doing high intensity exercise, and then you have high glucose and low fat for endurance as well. So I think it really boils down to personalized medicine and personalized nutrition, what you react to, what you are good at metabolizing, what you are good at storing, and then look at the different use cases that you are modifying your diet and lifestyle for.
Right. Okay. So fat, the type of fat makes a difference. The type of, the substrate, the quality does make a difference. And just by cutting out processed food, you're probably getting rid of a lot of processed sugars and unhealthy, seed oils and inflammatory fats as well. So that in and of itself, like you said, can make just such a huge difference. So with respect to the studies that you've been doing on the brain function, I'm really interested in that. How ketones are, you're looking in a laboratory situation, and you're also doing studies on humans in this case as well, I think. What are you seeing in terms of how ketones can affect brain function for, I could ask you all kinds of questions. Do you know, or do you have data on mental illness, also Alzheimer's, dementia, and then also cancer of the brain?
Right. So let's start with mental illness. I just recently interviewed Dr. Chris Palmer, associate professor of psychiatry from Harvard, and he has a lot of case studies as well as studies that look at effect of ketogenic diet on mental illness. And he found that as soon as you start treating epilepsy patients with ketogenic diet, not only their epilepsy go away, they also experience an improvement of mental disorders as well as metabolic disorders. So I haven't done any studies on that myself, but his book Brain Energy really outlines all the studies and all the data. It's tremendous. So I'm really glad that he's out there, like, spreading the knowledge and the word around. And
yeah, I just read his book as well. I just read his book. It's amazing. Incredible. Yeah. And the work he's doing is just revolutionizing, psychiatry. And so, yeah, I was just curious, have you done brain scans? Have you seen like what happens to the person with prior and, post ketone ingestion or anything like that? So I was just curious if you knew.
Yeah, that was one of the proposal that we sort of chatted about, using exogenous ketones such as ketone IQ because of the acute effect and the predictability of how high your ketones will be, and then put these people in scan machines and also go through the brain scans or functional MRI and looking at brain function, brain energy activation, and all of that. So I haven't done it myself, but I'm sure with Chris doing all these making all this noise, I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
And then in terms of Alzheimer's, I believe NIH is currently running a study on dementia and Alzheimer's using exogenous ketones. I don't think they have published yet, but the studies are ongoing. The study that I mentioned earlier, Mujika Parody, on brain network stabilization, that is a good paper that I always share with people when it comes to effect of ketones and brain communication or brain network communication with each other. We have a grant that we just submitted last year with the Naval Health Research Center, looking at traumatic brain injury, using ketone IQ for brain injury patients, either mid to long term, especially if they have sort of side effects that comes from it, like sort of coordination problems, eye coordination, motor sensory problems. And the reason why we think ketone may be helpful is because acutely in a brain injury, we are seeing hypermetabolism of glucose, where the brain suddenly needs a high amount of glucose and high amount of energy, possibly to really, make sure that the brain gets enough energy, even though the injury may affect it negatively if there is any sort of concussion and any sort of pressure in there, edema. making sure that the brain function is maintained. But also some people believe that the glucose are being pulled in to be shoved into the pentose phosphate pathway to mitigate the damage. So it's sort of like creating NADPH and mitigate those damage. And then long term with these patients is that they have seen hypometabolism of glucose, meaning they have deficiency in glucose metabolism, and that leads to cognitive impairment and also increased risk of Alzheimer's and other cognitive impairment diseases. So that is very similar in terms of metabolic profiling to Alzheimer's. That's why in a paper we published early last year that is now getting traction, actually, if you look at search for my name and then look at ketones and lactate as potential intervention for traumatic brain injury and neurodegenerative diseases, you'll find a review paper where we put together all the studies to date, both using endogenous ketones and exogenous ketones in these circumstances, as well as what we propose the mechanism of action could be. So that's a very exciting area, because I think TBI is of a very high priority for both military and the sports community.
Yeah.
Because you can only do so much when it comes to equipment and this and that, but ultimately what's going on inside, we need something, especially if it's available, such as exogenous ketones. Why not try it? Because if it can, one, mitigate the acute damage that is happening, and two, mitigate the long-term damage, especially when it comes to cognition and function, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. And so some of the information that I've read would suggest that if ketones are present even during an injury, the brain's going to fare better than if there are no ketones on board at the time of the injury. And obviously as quickly after that as possible to get the ketones into the body to help to mitigate the inflammation and the damage in these areas. Is that what you're seeing as well?
That's exactly what I said about hypermetabolism of glucose, right? So we know that the brain really wants high energy during that time.
Yeah.
They want to take in all these glucose. But what if you are providing the brain, on top of the glucose, you provide ketones, which also provides energy? So then the brain has more choices to really, compartmentalize. Okay, this is the glucose for mitigation of the damage. This is the ketone for energy, for function, and you can maintain all of that and really compensate for the energy deficiency or the energy deficit that is occurring during the injury itself.
Interesting. And then, so can you speak a little bit to the what you know of the studies that have been done with cancer, and are these exogenous ketones that you're providing useful in that context?
Yeah, sure. I think cancer is another beast of its own, because different cancers behave differently and different cancers are being treated differently. For example, I think Professor Nick Webster from UC San Diego, he looks at using, calorie restriction, fasting, ketogenic diet at treating breast cancer. And he saw, the increase of ketones actually improve the outcomes of the animals that has cancer. But then it doesn't work for liver cancer, for example, because liver doesn't actually metabolize ketones. Liver produce ketones, but then it actually send those ketones to the rest of the body to be metabolized. So we have to sort of understand the metabolism of the organ, and then the specific cancer that affects those organs. There have been studies also using exogenous ketones as adjuvant treatment as for cancer together with chemotherapy. Some people find that their nausea that comes from chemotherapy got improved because of the ketones. Some people find that they have more energy, just general fatigue level. It really helps with that. So I don't think there is a definitive sort of study out yet, or sort of a turning point paper that is out at the moment. I think a lot of studies are ongoing at the moment, and I'm sure like pandemic really put a hit on the on the recruitment process as well as running those studies. So a lot of these studies are being delayed as well as to their completion date and also the publication. So that's as much as I know.
Uh-huh. And do you when in the studies that you're doing, do you compare exogenous ketones effectiveness to endogenous ketones? So in other words, the ketones that our body naturally makes versus the ketones that you're drinking that are for lack of a better word, artificial.
Yeah. For most of our studies, we are comparing exogenous ketones with placebo. The whole premise of having exogenous ketones is that you can just take it and that your ketone levels are increasing. Versus if you want to run a study for ketogenic diet, you have to set an amount of time for the person to get keto adapted and produce its own ketones.
Right.
And also the amount of ketones being produced also vary between people. Whereas if you take exogenous ketone, you can roughly estimate that level. It's quite similar across the board between participants. So for example, our study with the military, it was between exogenous ketones versus no exogenous ketones with just glucose or dextrose as carbs as energy source. So we haven't looked into the effect of endogenous ketone and exogenous ketones yet, but I believe that they both have their own place in separate places. For example, like epilepsy, I don't think exogenous ketones would be as effective as ketogenic diet, because we know that when people get off ketogenic diet, the episodes of epilepsy comes back, and because the nature of exogenous ketones in and of itself is like it raise your ketone levels for 4 to 6 hours, and then you can obviously top up, but maybe some people find that more sustainable than the keto diet. Some people prefer just to do the keto diet. I think it really depends on the use case and on the person's preference. Same thing with like cancer, for example. A lot of people, if they're under the medication or because they're fatigued, they can't adhere to the keto diet. So in that sense, like maybe exogenous ketones may be better just to give them the ketones they need without putting through more stress for them while they're going to chemotherapy. And then there are other very specific use of ketones, for example, just investigation based on just us going out there to prove the mechanism of action and also investigate the effect of ketones. Because when you're talking about ketogenic diet, we are looking at a lot of things here. We're looking at higher fat intake. We're looking at lower blood glucose level over time. We're looking at flat line of insulin over time. And then we're looking at increasing ketones. So there are many variables here. But if we want to say, okay, ketogenic diet does improve X disease, let's, take out the ketones and give them exogenous ketones and look at the effects. If they are the same, then we can say it is a ketone, and then we can go in there in vitro or in animal work and really look into the details as to understand further the minute details of what pathway is being affected, what proteins are upregulated, and all of that. I think that has a big role in it. But some doctors also don't really care much about the mechanism of action. Yes, we like to know the science. We also appreciate the investigative side of science, but ultimately they are there to help people to improve. So as long as they can get the endpoint to improve either mental health symptoms or metabolic disorder symptoms, if ketogenic diet works, they don't care if there are 100 variables, but given together, this 100 variables packed together in this package called ketogenic diet, and it gives positive effect, then that's all they care about, and that's fine. We have basic scientists who really go out there and look at mechanistic properties of ketones, and we've got clinicians who are out there who are prescribing ketogenic diet or exogenous ketones to really improve people's lives. So everyone has their own roles to play.
Yeah. And so with exogenous ketones, if you're drinking them, if they're coming from external supplementation of sorts, which you're working on and have developed and are working with, what happens? And maybe, it's different for somebody who's working on mice models in a laboratory, but you're actually working with humans and looking at what's going on. I think, correct me if I'm wrong. But what happens when
Yeah.
there's
So
elevated glucose and elevated ketones? If somebody's not changing their diet, they're just adding the ketones in. Is that a whole different pathway that's going on in the cellular, structure, and what's the difference there?
sure. So we are working with humans, especially with the military. My previous work during my PhD was with animals, with rodents, looking at type 2 diabetic heart. So I've been on both sides now. And you're right, because physiologically it is impossible for us to have enough ketones to be in ketosis while having glucose, whereas exogenous ketones provide us with that opportunity to have access to both glucose and ketones. Now, having said that, some people argue, oh, that's super physiological, that's artificial, or that's unnatural. It's untrue because, excuse me, we have many substrates available to ourselves at all times anyway. We have proteins, fats, and glucose all present, right? And we always will need glucose, even when you are not eating glucose. Even when you're on ketogenic diet, you measure your blood glucose, it still has a base level. It's not zero, right?
Yeah.
Whereas ketones, if you don't go on keto diet, you will get 0 to 0.1. So what does that tell you? You will always need glucose, and I'm not demonizing glucose at all. And glucose will always be there, but giving your body the option of ketones, it enhances the availability of substrates to your body. And then, for example, when stuff like brain injury happens, your brain can then take in those substrates and really make sure that there is no energy deficit, because whenever there's energy deficit, that's where problem occurs, right? So
Okay.
know that even you're on ketogenic diet, you are technically still having sugar and ketones, high ketones, but not high sugar. But you're having sugar there, 4-5 millimolar. It's still a lot of sugar. But the problem comes when you are already in excess of calories and you are like going ham on the sugar, and you're like 7-8 millimolar diabetic, on sugar and insulin resistance, and you're taking in ketones. That is calories and that is substrate. So you are contributing to that factor. That's not going to help you. That's not going to improve your metabolism. That's not going to improve your condition. So in that case, maybe ketogenic diet may be a better option, where you drastically reduce your sugar intake and train your body to be more metabolically flexible and be able to burn your fat storage as well as convert your fat storage into ketones.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So if there's plenty of glucose, I mean, the liver's always going to produce glucose, so we're never going to run out. We could run out of other things, but we're never going to run out of glucose, because our liver will always produce some. So if there's plenty of glucose and there's plenty of ketones in the blood, what happens to the organs and the cellular pathways? Do they just, like you said, they switch back and forth? Are they just kind of always shuttling back and forth, like second by second, or do they use up one and then go to the other? Like, how does that even work?
So when you look at metabolism, you have to look at it as a flux. It's not a linear equation, right? It's not like one switches on, the other switches off. It's probably both sides going on, but one side is higher, the other side is lower. So having said that, if you upregulate fatty acid oxidation, you downregulate glucose. So that is the basic sort of metabolic pathway understanding. But then when it comes to your question, you're asking, what will your body use first? Generally speaking, what we have seen in studies, the body will use up the ketones and will take up the ketones and use them first. But it also falls down to how keto adapted you are, but also in terms of what are you doing, right? If you are doing certain exercise, if you're doing high intensity exercise, they'll probably switch over more to glucose. If you're doing endurance exercise and you're keto adapted, chances are you probably use up the ketones first, and your body will start making more ketones from your fat as well, especially if your body is used to making ketones out of fat. So I think it really falls down to, one, what your body is trained to do, and two, what are you doing to your body in terms of external stimulus, and then that sends signal to your cells what substrates to choose.
Okay. So let's say my husband's a long distance swimmer. So let's say he's keto adapted. He's going to swim 10 kilometers at a time. Takes him about 3.5 hours. And and he goes into the race, he's keto adapted, but at some point he's going to run out of glucose, and his glycogen stores are going to diminish enough so that he is going to need some refueling to happen. What would you recommend for something like that, and for a longer endurance sport or athlete in that situation? Versus, obviously, if it's a sprinter, then it's a whole different thing. But for that longer distance, when you are significantly depleting your glycogen stores in your muscles, are you seeing that the addition of the exogenous ketones maybe prior to or during a race would be useful?
So there are actually several papers that have been published already. If you look at Peter Haspel's group in Belgium, he published a couple of papers using exogenous ketones. So the protocol is simply taking exogenous ketones and glucose, actually, whatever, so pre exercise or pre-race or pre-training protocol that people use, half an hour before you start, and then top it up about 90 minutes into your workout. So together, again, the ketones 90 minutes after. And then in terms of glucose consumption, they are recommending between 60 to 70 grams per hour, which is roughly about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight per hour.
Okay. And so how many ketones would you take? I mean, I know that your product comes with a little measuring cup. I don't have it with me right now.
I'm currently taking the big one, but we have the shot sizes one. Hold on, I think I have it somewhere. Yeah, I have it in my bag. Do you want to see it?
Well, I just remember there was a little shot glass, and there was lines on the shot glass. It looked like a little medicine cup. And so
you're talking about this?
Yes, indeed. So if you're an athlete and you're in the middle of the ocean and you're just, halfway through this race or 90 minutes or whatever, how much would you take?
Yeah. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
This is what you can do. So we have come up with a single serve ones that you can just pop it open and shot it.
Oh, fantastic. But that's just ketones. There's no glucose in there.
That's just ketone. That's not glucose in it. It's 0 carbs, 0 fat, 0 protein. It's just ketones, 10 grams.
10 grams. Okay, great. So how long does it take your body to burn off 10 grams of ketones? And like how many, what does that translate into calories? Or
so say your husband is around like 70 kilograms and whatnot, I would recommend like take 2 of these before workout, and then 90 minutes in, pop 2 more, and then swimming is probably a bit harder, right? But if you're like on a bike or running, they'll be doing like the GU or whatever carb supplement of choice, and throughout that time, and then just pop it and chug it in between. So 30 minutes before, 90 minutes after you start exercising. So about 2 hours later.
Excellent. That's awesome. Thank you for that. So just to turn the conversation a little bit more, because we're kind of getting close to the end of our time here, and I just want to know, for you, what's the most exciting thing in your world right now? Like, what's really exciting for you that you're noticing, that you're seeing, that you're discovering in your work?
What's more exciting? It's probably more mundane. It's not like some super science discovery. I mean, of course, like that is very exciting. Like, as we figure out that it helps with Alzheimer's, it helps with all these diseases, it's super exciting. Don't get me wrong. But what I am very excited about right now with my role and me personally is the fact that more and more people know of the existence of ketones, and that it is not a fat diet, that it is not a snake oil, that it is pure science and it's real, and that a lot of people can benefit from it. And for those who have given Ketone IQ a chance, they have, raving reviews about it. So I think that is what excites me, and the fact that a lot of doctors actually started prescribing Ketone IQ to their patients, because their patients actually ask for it and they actually feel better when they're on Ketone IQ. That to me is more excited. Is more exciting than a lot of these like super new science data and discovery. And don't get me wrong, I am still excited about them, but it'll take a while before they get translated into people's lives. But the fact that we are impacting people's life right now, for me, that validates why I studied science, and that validates my passion of wanting to know all the science and data, but also wanting to be the bridge that connects the science and the general population.
Uh-huh. That's great. So are you a proponent of the ketogenic diet yourself, for doctors that are working with patients in this regard? Like, that it's a combination or it's a synergy between the diet and the supplement? Or is there some doctors that might just say, don't change your diet, don't worry about your diet, just take this supplement and add this to what you're already doing and don't bother changing anything?
I'm a proponent of whatever that works for you and that is sustainable. So
Mm-hmm.
if ketogenic diet in and of itself works for you and you are seeing great results, there's no reason to change, then stick with it. If you find it hard to go on a ketogenic diet or your body is not, going in and out of ketosis, then maybe use Ketone IQ to really bump up their blood ketone levels, because that will also upregulate all the hormones and enzymes related to keto metabolism. So maybe then you're training your body to metabolize a high level of ketones, and hopefully you'll be able to create more ketones and burn more ketones. And then on the last group, if you really, really hate ketogenic diet and really can't do it because, the fats or whatever, you just can't get past it, then having some form of ketones is better than having none. And obviously, this is all on the premise that you are not having excess of calories, as well as increasing, hyper processed sugar that really drives your metabolic dysfunction.
Uh-huh. So what you're saying is that regardless of what you are doing in your kitchen, or regardless of anything, ketones in the body are beneficial.
Yep.
That's what you're seeing with the science. I mean, this is
Especially with the
all.
brain, like people definitely see an acute benefit of ketones when it comes to brain and cognition.
Yeah, and
So
we
that's
know.
why I
Yeah.
believe having some form of ketones will be good for you. And I think the hook is, when you drink exogenous ketones, it's an acute feeling, right? You can feel it right away, but it's also temporary. So hopefully that gives you the motivation to have a taste of ketosis,
Yeah.
so that you can then go out there and say, actually, this is real. So maybe I should try ketogenic diet, or maybe I should drink keto like every day, or maybe I should just cut off all the processed sugar food that I eat every day.
Yeah.
Either way, you are pushing yourself or pushing your life towards a healthier direction. I'll be happy.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's awesome. So when somebody drinks the ketone IQ, um, when you say they feel it, so is it going to be like drinking a cup of coffee, a shot of espresso? Like, what are people experiencing from this?
I get this question a lot. They're like, what am I expecting? What do I feel? And do I feel like coffee? The answer is no, because coffee and caffeine, they are stimulant,
Yeah.
right? The way I describe it, it gives you energy. You feel energetic, but not in a stimulant manner. Because a stimulant manner will give you the jitters, will give
Yeah.
you the heart palpitation,
Mm-hmm.
but you are actually getting energy. You're being very alert and focused, but in a very calm manner.
That's
So if you
great.
pay attention to that, then you'll be able to know exactly what I'm describing. It took quite a lot of iteration to come up with this explanation as well, because it's a feeling, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that no one has experienced before, because they've never taken it. So how do I explain it to them? So there was one time a guy with ADHD, he took it. He was like, I don't have problems with energy. The problem is I have too much energy and I
Mhm.
can't concentrate and focus. But then after he drank it, I was like, so how do you feel? He's like, I feel energetic, but just nice level. I don't feel hyper. I don't feel over. I just feel good. So some
Mhm.
people literally just say they just feel good. And you can interpret it in many ways then. It's so hard to explain to people. So what I would say is go out there and try a shot, and then you'll feel for yourself. And
Yeah.
I think for people who are in ketogenic diet, who have been in ketogenic diet, they're not very surprised with the feeling. They're like, okay, that's very familiar feeling for me.
Yeah. I myself am often in a state of ketosis. And I tell people I call it a keto high. It's like I feel a little euphoric. It's not an amped up, jittery, sort of stimulated, nothing artificial like that, like a caffeine. Like I cannot drink coffee. I won't sleep for 3 days. But like
I
when
don't
I'm
drink
in
coffee
keto,
either.
Yeah, when I'm in ketosis, I just feel very calm, very alert, very aware, and happy, and my mood is stable. And it's a slight euphoric feeling that I just call the keto high. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that or has come up with a word for it, but that's the words that I use to describe it. So,
You literally just described being in ketosis using ketogenic diet in a very similar manner as I described when you're on exogenous ketones, and they should align
yeah,
because they're both ketones in your brain.
yeah, it's amazing. It's really amazing. It's better than a glass of wine or smoking a joint or, even running, up 500 stairs in the back of my house. There's a lot of things that can give you that euphoric feeling, but to have it without any of those other things needing to do them, it's pretty amazing. I mean, the ketogenic diet is definitely something that I feel is just it's it's amazing, and I love the way it makes me feel. I mean, that's why I continue to do it. I don't have a specific health challenge. I never have been overweight. I've never been diabetic, but I just came through the back door when I started working with Dr. Stephen Phinney in his clinic many years ago. So this came to me really as a way to promote longevity and to healthy aging and to regenerative medicine as a piece of that. So I just feel so strongly about this diet for people to really reverse not only their conditions, but also just to optimize their health in every way. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Maybe you could just show us your bottle and just show us what your product looks like when it comes to you. I have a box of that as well at my house. It doesn't taste
There you
that
go.
good. I just must admit, I want to warn y'all, it
Yes.
doesn't taste that good. It tastes really
Yeah.
bad.
It tastes like it works.
Uh-huh. Okay, good.
Well, I mean, I see people who have tried our first generation of exogenous ketone, which was Ketonester. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
you've tried Ketonesters before.
No.
They taste 5 times as bad. So
Okay.
if you say this is really bad, that hits your throat like it literally like a punch.
Ah,
It's really bitter, and one of the reason why we switched to this one was because the potential uh sort of flavoring R&D that we're able to do with this compound, this
okay.
molecule, instead of the other one. Because the other one we did, part of the military contract was to improve the flavor, and we worked with Monell, which is a sensory research center and R&D flavor R&D research center based in Philly. And they try everything. They tried dairy, they tried natural sweeteners, artificial sweeteners. None of them work.
Mhm.
So it's really difficult just by nature. The molecule is so bitter.
Yeah.
Whereas with butanediol, we have seen much better profile when it comes to R&D. So we are actually improving the flavor already. Hopefully in the next coming weeks, next 2 or 3 weeks, don't quote me on that. We will be releasing a little bit more sort of improved flavor.
Okay. I mean, I prefer something that's pure and doesn't have a bunch of flavorings in it and artificial sweeteners and any of that. Like I would prefer
Right.
just to know this thing tastes bad. I'm just going to take a little bit of it
Yeah.
every day or whatever, and at least I know
Right.
that it's pure and clean and there's not a bunch of junk in it. For me personally, that's my prerogative.
Yeah.
But
I know.
yeah,
It's
so
like it's like we can't please everyone. Like some people, I get you as well. Like I prefer to just drink it straight up, and I can take it. But then some other people who are not used to ketogenic diet, for example, who are used to sugary stuff, it's impossible for them to drink it.
yeah.
And also when it comes to performance as well, making sure that you drink one whole bottle, or for your husband like 2 whole bottles of these small ones,
Mhm.
and not just like sipping it. It's because you want to have that high level of ketones in your blood during that short burst amount of time when you're exercising. That is also quite important.
Okay. How does it relate in terms of calories, like ketones and calories?
So 10 grams of this is about 70 calories. So it's about
Okay.
7 calories per gram.
Okay.
So
Excellent.
like it sits right in between. It sits right in between glucose and proteins and fat. Because
Okay.
it's like 4 and 9, it's like 7.
Okay, fantastic. So this would be something that I think would be useful for people that do have, for example, maybe seizures or Alzheimer's or dementia, and they just can't comply with the diet, or they're unwilling or incapable of doing so, or somebody who's brain injured, or has a deficit of cognition. It would be, this is the type of context that this would be really useful for. And then of course, athletes and like you're using it in the, military, astronauts, whatever like that. So there's different applications for such a thing. Although many people in the world that I work in would suggest that, this is cheating. This is not natural. This is not, the optimal way to go about getting your ketone levels up. And so I kind of sit in the middle. I feel like there is a place for it. And if you can do a keto diet to get your ketones up, that's ultimately going to allow you to have control over your biochemistry and not have to rely on any outside, crutch. So that's just my take on it.
And also for those people who are on medication that finds it very hard to get into ketosis, because some people they are very compliant to the diet, but because of the medication, their insulin is always spiked up and they can't get into ketosis. That way, this exogenous ketone will help you do that. And in terms of cheating, I've heard that so many times as well. It's like it's almost saying that okay, taking proteins are cheating because you're not taking it directly from the source. Taking in any form of sugar, in baking, in your cake, it's also cheating because you're not taking it straight from the fruits and honey or whatever. Like there's so many arguments around there. I think it's when it comes to molecule, it's the same exact molecule. A ketone is a ketone is a ketone. That's what your body recognizes as, and that's what your body will metabolize, and that's what your brain will recognize as well. So whether or not if it's cheating, I mean, if you're doing it for like calorie restriction, that's the extra bonus, by the way. Exogenous ketones does have appetite suppression properties. So some people actually use it to aid their fast. If you look at Cynthia Thurlow, she's like a super, world expert in intermittent fasting. She has, given TED Talks around intermittent fasting, and especially for women and hormonal cycles around fasting. She uses Ketone IQ when she travels and really prolong her fast as well, and making sure she has the energy both physically and mentally to go through her meetings and talks and stuff.
Oh, that's a really great suggestion. I love that. I'm really glad you brought that up. That's an excellent idea for people that are fasting. So I appreciate that a lot. Okay, so as we wrap this up, I just have to ask you a personal question, if you don't mind. What is your diet like? Tell me what you eat in a day.
My diet is a low carb diet, so I'm not a strict keto. So I would take about up to 100 grams of carbs per day, and those are primarily from fruits. And I would have some complex carbs as well, like either noodles or rice, but in a small amount, because generally I'm not a rice person, even though I grew up in Malaysia and we eat rice all the time. I prefer, I do like my meats. So I eat a lot of red meat, fish. I think middle last year, I was eating a lot of red meat and my LDL went through the roof. It was like 222. And then my doctor was concerned, blah, blah, blah. And then fast forward 6 months, I used that 6 months to try and adjust it. So I was still on low carb, but I switched over the red meat to more fish. And it literally halved my LDL to 101 from 222 to 111.
Okay, great.
So that's my diet. It's pretty simple. And then just try and exercise 5 times a week.
And what kind of exercise do you do?
So I do mainly resistance exercise, so a lot of strength training. At the moment, the program I'm going through, it's very similar to what they call a German volume training, which you choose a compound exercise and you do 10 sets of 10 reps. Okay. So you can't do very heavy because you're gonna hit fatigue really fast, but it's really good for increasing the intensity, increasing the heart rate, and also building muscles.
Great. Awesome. That's excellent. I love it. That's kind of, I mean, I'm not doing that program, but it's a similar philosophy that I employ. So that's great. I love it. And, so you're low carb, you do eat animal proteins and animal fats and some vegetables and maybe some fruit once in a while, maybe a little rice in it now and again. So that's great. Excellent.
Yeah, I try to eat as much fruit in terms of berries as possible, because generally like berries don't really spike my blood glucose that much anyway, because you can easily check that, right? When you do your finger prick or you have continuous glucose monitoring, you can just figure out like what kind of fruits that your body just is just happy to have.
Yeah, and typically berries are lower in sugar than a lot of the other fruits. So that's a great choice if you're going to have a fruit to start with berries. So do you check your blood sugar a lot?
Most of the time when I'm doing like internal study for a different formulation of ketones. So it's like when I make myself the main subject, because I'm not gonna make somebody drink a product that I don't believe in myself, or I haven't tried it myself. So I will do that. And sometimes I test like 6 times a day, because every hour I'm looking at my blood glucose and ketones and looking at the curve. So pricking myself 7 days a day, it's casual.
Yeah. Okay, good. So you're tracking. That's good. You're keeping a watch. So where can people find your product? Where can they find you if they are interested in knowing more about your work and getting a hold of these amazing ketone esters?
Yeah, sure. They can head over to hvmn.com. So
HVMN. Okay.
Yes. Health via modern nutrition. hvmn.com, or on any social media platform. The company's tag is at HVMN, and myself, it's at Latt Mansor, LattMansor. So at Latt Mansor on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm trying to grow that as well. And we have a HVMN podcast that I am a host of. And we talk about everything health, fitness, optimization, keto metabolism, insulin resistance, everything you can think of, including mental health as well. As I said, I just interviewed Dr. Chris Palmer. I was on Max Lugavia's show this week, and we have Dave Asprey on as well. So exciting, episodes coming up, and go and check it out and leave us a review or rating or any comments if you have any suggestions.
Great. And how can I support what you're doing? How, if there is a way, what would that look like?
Yeah, of course. I think for the easiest way is sharing the knowledge that we just discussed, the differences between endogenous and exogenous. There's no, we need to stop looking at nutrients, diets, and substrates as one is better than the other and demonization of one over the other. We need to look at it as tools. They're all tools that we have access to, and we need to be able to differentiate different substrates, different tools to optimize for our use case. So there are cases for a ketogenic diet, there are cases for exogenous ketones, and I'm always very, very transparent when it comes to that. And I'm not saying that, exogenous ketones is your end all be all product. It's not your snake oil that solves all your problems, but it surely has a lot of benefits to health optimization. Same with ketogenic diet, right? So sharing these knowledge, the nuance, and the different use case with your audience, and point them to us, like HVMN. If they want more information, come to us, ask me questions. I'm very, very happy to answer, whatever questions they have.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much. This has been incredibly informative, and I just really appreciate meeting you. And I hope we cross paths again.
Absolutely. When are you giving a talk anywhere or a conference that you're going to? Because I might be going to some conference as well in the near future.
I don't have a plan to go to any sort of keto low carb conferences on my calendar so far. I'm doing a few talks that are sort of inner circle things in the next month, actually, and I have a retreat in Mexico that I do every quarter.
Sounds much better than conferences.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, maybe we'll cross paths at one of the conferences coming up. I would love to meet you in person. And yeah, again, just thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much, Mary.
Have a great day. I realize that what you've heard here is a radical departure from today's politically correct nutritional guidance. If it were politically correct, it would be endorsed by the media. And if it were endorsed by the media, it would be endorsed by Big Pharma. Let's face it, Big Pharma makes money when you and I stay sick. But the truth is, you can take control of your health if you have a plan, a system in place, and a support network. After helping people get keto adapted for over 25 years, I found that everyone who succeeds does 3 things. I walk you through exactly what these are and what to do specifically to get into ketosis in just 5 days. You can join my next 5-day keto challenge right now by going to ketogenicdietcoach.com. I look forward to seeing you on the inside of the challenge and helping you have wild success with your keto diet.